Welcome back to the S&C podcast, everyone. I'm one of your hosts, Coach Carly, and we got Maddie Scar, our other host here as well, and a new guest joining us today, all the way from South Australia. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm bringing more South Aussie guys with us. We got Neven Antic of D8 Training. How you doing, Neven?
I'm great, thanks, Steph.
Yeah, we're doing well, thanks. So we kept in contact quite a bit over the last, it's been a couple of months since I started ATG. I reckon it was back in February we first made contact through the ATG Pulse Telegram group. I think you reached out, actually, didn't you? You were going through and you managed to find me out there. Tell us a little bit about your journey into ATG, because it's a little bit different from like the coaching background. You started off on, I won't tell too much of your story, but you started off a little bit different with your ATG journey. So tell us a little bit more about how you got started as a coach.
Thanks for having me on, Steph and Matt. And like you said, I was super excited when I saw there was someone else from Adelaide, and I was like, just let me suss out this guy first, see if he's okay, and then sure enough, you live up to it. And it was fantastic to have someone. We've got a decent sized city here, but I wasn't expecting anyone else in the local area, and it's always great to have someone to bounce ideas, because the ATG system is different, in my opinion, compared to a lot of other systems. And to answer your question, I think similar to you guys, a lot of my battles were with injuries in my initial younger years. And that kind of led me down the path to knees over toes. And I think I actually originally heard about Ben. I think it was a Jake Tour podcast, or there was another podcast that I listened to him probably about 2 years ago. And as soon as sometimes when you hear something, it just really gravitates towards you. And then I jumped on his website, had a bit of a look, and I think I signed up for his program later on that day, just because his message really resonated with me, because I had my knee issues, and I wasn't able to, ever overcome them. And then, one thing led to another, and I basically jumped on that, and then, fast tracked along. ATG for Coaches came out, and I knew that was for me as well, so just jumped on that straight away. And here we are today. So hopefully that's the short version of that.
So you never had I think a lot of the coaches kind of had the initial reaction of seeing him on social media. And I remember specifically seeing him jumping off of a ladder and then doing some ridiculous things. Like, this guy is a lunatic. Yeah. Like, there's no way this is for real. But then you see it enough times, and eventually you kind of actually look deeper into it. Did you ever have that sort of thought in your head, or did you just go straight in?
No, not really. Like, for me, it was more about his message and what he was saying. Hey, these are the issues that I had. This is the path that I took, and I needed to kind of take a step back and kind of, almost rebuild and build that bulletproof reserve. He never explained it that way in the past. But it was really that message that came across to me that really gravitated towards me. And then as I started to look into it, I realized, hey, this guy can do some great athletic feats. And to be honest, to be fair to him, probably 2 years ago, he didn't have the physique that he has now. So it wasn't as eye-catching, as kind of that marketing and the glitz that he has now. Whereas before, I looked at him and I was like, this guy just looks like a normal human being, but look at these crazy things that he can do. And then obviously he had the great examples when he was young and he wasn't able to move that way. And I thought, hey, he's got something special here. What can I learn from this? Because one of my biggest challenge always was, hey, you got to be bigger and you got to be stronger, you got to be more explosive. But we never looked at the other end of the pendulum there, being able to absorb some of this force. And I think that's what led to my injuries. I'd make myself really strong, really explosive, but then something would go wrong. And then all of a sudden I'd be back to the drawing board, because I'd be rehabbing these things and I would never spend the time required to actually do it properly, if that made sense, because I never had that at the front of mind.
Tell us a little bit more about your injuries, Neven. Like you I think from memory, had something to do with your knees from what we've spoken about in the past. Yeah. But tell us a transition from, so you experienced all of these injuries, and then what was the next step? I mean, obviously football had slowed down a little bit for you after starting ATG, but what was the feel like? What was the transition like from previous to after starting ATG?
Yeah. So majority of my injuries were kind of in my prime. So the biggest one was I did my ACL when I was 23, so that's kind of in a way for me, my prime. That's when I was coming out, hoping to take the next level, become a professional soccer player here in Australia. And then something like that happens and you're out for 12 months, and it was devastating. It's obviously tough to rebound back from. I always had a really good positive mindset. Hey, I'm going to come back from this. And sure enough, I was able to rehab and get my knee back to a decent state, I'll say. But I never really focused on that range, and I never really had full flexibility or flexion in my knees. So I wasn't able to sit on my heels, as an example, until probably maybe the last, I'll say 12 months, until I started incorporating a lot of what Ben said, focusing my couch stretch, focusing my reverse Nordics, focusing on that range, because I was always led to believe, you'll never get that range back. And it's something I never really focused on. And, I think that was a big mistake on my part, not really focusing on that. But at the same time, I didn't have that knowledge back then. I didn't have someone like a Ben in my corner. I'd focus and look at your traditional, rehab model. When you're squatting, sit back. Don't embrace that knee. The knee compression and looking back. Part of me leaning into this space was being there and try to kind of avoid that for some of the younger athletes who are coming up now, and giving them an opportunity to kind of chase their dreams rather than all of a sudden them being hurt when they're in their prime as well. So
yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people miss, especially coming back off of the injuries. So one of the things I like to kind of ask coaches is, because we see a lot in ATG and a lot in other kind of coaching groups, that some people can lean really, really hard into one set of ideas and then kind of shun everything else. Are there any other kind of ideas that you pull from other people specifically that you like to add into the system?
I do, a lot of the stuff when I was in my younger days, I used to love, and you guys, I'm not sure actually if you guys know, we're obviously a little bit younger, but T Nation, I used to love, kind of, I'll say, trolling through T Nation. There's some great articles there. It's still good to go back sometimes now. And Ben just actually recently came across, there's some articles from Charles Poliquin. I used to always jump on there and have a bit of a look, but that was the mindset back then. I was training like a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, not as an athlete, right? But my end goal was to be an athlete. And then I didn't have the tools at that point to realize, okay, well, these are, I can take this component, but then I need to kind of apply it to this to become a better athlete. And then occasionally I'd gravitate and somebody else would pop up, like Joe DeFranco. Joe DeFranco, I'm sure you guys know Joe. Cal Dietz later on and Chris Corfus, I really started to gravitate towards them as the marketing came out and I was able to realize, hey, these guys are actually training athletes. I need to be training more like this. I think my challenge at that time was, because I was so beat down by that point, that I still needed to kind of step back, because a lot of what these guys were showing was more, hey, this is how you get faster and stronger, but they weren't really, educating us on, hey, if you've already got some of these problems, you need to really focus on that and get those things fixed. So I still love incorporating some of the things, like that Joe has or Cal or Chris Corfus, spring ankle, big fan of that. Even Dan John, I really love what Dan John said, I still do a lot of carries. I like carries both for my athletes, but also for general population. Because I just find they're very functional and they carry over to a lot of other things. So, so if I had to probably name a couple, carries are a big one. I like the spring ankle, the isometric side of things. Even Jake Tura, I've been toying around some of his things with some of my athletes in terms of, the iso holds, especially for the ones that are coming in and their knees are a little bit sore initially, and then just getting them to slow down a little bit, whether it's holding some isometric or really doing some slow eccentrics as well.
Let's elaborate a little bit more on your athletes. So D8 training, can you tell us a little bit more about how that all started, what your direction is with that, where you're going with that, how it's transformed? I mean, I've been to your little setup at home and it's freaking awesome. Like when I got a house and a garage that big, that's exactly what I'll be doing. And I'm sure that if Matty was to see it too, he'd get some pretty good ideas. But tell us a little bit more about
I've seen it on social media. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's, for me, like I said, I've come into this a little bit later in life. I had a successful IT career and I loved IT, and I always tell everyone I loved IT. It was, for me, there was two things. I loved sports, I loved lifting, and then I loved computers, and IT. And, and then at one point or another, I realized, hey, you might not be able to take this sporting thing too far. You got to get serious with something else. So I focused on my IT, and I always still played soccer on the side as well. But there was that itch inside of me that was like, you know what, I always want to get into that strength field. I want to get into the fitness field. And then more recently, we decided to move from Melbourne to Adelaide. And I knew that was going to be a catalyst at some point, for one point or another, that it was actually, I'm going to make the transition. And so when we were looking for a place, I was like, I'd love to have something in the back where I could start out of. But it was a big challenge too, because my ego was, get a big warehouse, start off big, but I also knew I didn't have the network yet to be able to do that. So I thought, hey, where can I start off small, make an impact, grow my name, kind of almost outgrow my place. and then, look to move to a larger warehouse when warehouse style gym, if you want to put it that way, when I've got the client base to actually fill, 50% of that capacity straight away from day one. So for me, it was, a lot about logistics. How do I set this up in such a way that I can provide a great service to my clients, while at the same time, being profitable, being able to sustain my business and keep growing it over time. So for me, the vision before I kind of started DA training was, all about athletes. It was like, hey, how do I help the younger version of me? How do I make these silly mistakes that I've made a long time ago and make it cost effective, affordable for them? So I do both one-to-ones and group trainings, but not everybody can afford it, the premium service of a one-to-one. And I'm a big believer in person. While I think online is great, I also think having a good coach who can adjust you on the spot there, that is, for me, it's invaluable in a way. And I think that's what you pay for. So, I wanted to make my services, cost effective for the younger guys who might not be able to, cover the one-to-ones, but they still wanted to be in part of a small group environment where they still get a lot of hands-on coaching as well, and then feed off the energy from the other guys in the group as well. So for me, the original vision was just train athletes. But when I started to kind of put the plans together and how this is going to work, I realized that's only a small part of the group. It's a small niche, because when you think about it, if I'm targeting young athletes, from 15 to 25, well, that's a small group of the population. So who else can I help? And then, then I was like, well, I can just help everyday human beings in a way, our businesswomen, businessmen, our busy mums, right? People that just want to change, whether it's their weight, whether it's the way they move, or whether it's the way they feel about themselves. So I basically branched out and kind of split them up between two different services, an athlete group, and then what I call my general population group. And, that's everybody. And in the general population group, I'll have between 15 and 60 years old. And they'll all do generally a variation of some of the ATG movements, whether it's a good morning or whether it's a squat, whether it's assisted or whether it's progress and they're holding weights. So it's, and that's what I love about the ATG system, is because it can regress to, an entry level person, whether that's someone young or whether that's someone that's injured, or we can progress them to someone that's a lot more advanced, as well. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question. I kind of jumped around a little bit.
Yeah, so you alluded to this a little bit, but one of the things that ATG kind of believes heavily is that the scale from rehab to elite performance is not linear, but it's not super different. It's just levels and progressions and variations like that. So how much do you kind of change things from athletes to general population, very different exercises, same exercises at different levels? How do you kind of differentiate that?
Probably the biggest difference between the athletes and the general population is with my athletes, I'll generally do like a lower upper split. So, on a Monday, they'll do lower body. On a Tuesday, they'll do an upper body. And with them, when we do lower body, because really that's as part of being a great athlete, is we probably invest majority of our energy in those lower body and, either getting that bulletproof or getting that strong and more explosive. So we'll probably spend 60 to 70% of our time in that region, the hips and the legs. And then the upper body days, I still want my athletes to be strong. A lot of them are soccer players, some are basketball, and we also have AFL, football here. As well. And, each one of those sports is a little bit of a different element in terms of how much strength they need in the upper body. But I still focus on the lower body days, and then if the client, if some of the athletes can only come in 2-3 times a week, we'll work out a best schedule for them, depending on whether it's their off season or if they're in season. So that's probably the biggest difference in terms of that. With my general population clients, it's always a full body day, because majority of the time they'll either be only coming in 2 or 3 times a week. And I want them to hit kind of, each of the different movements. So with general population, you'll usually be a lower body movement, an upper body movement, and then a mobilization of some type, whether it's a couch stretch or, an elephant walk, just to get a little bit of that movement quality in as well. Because, most of my clients are seated for, 8-10 hour days, and they'll come to me. And yes, I want them to move and I want them to feel like they've trained, but they've got to feel better as well when they leave. And I think that's the other part of the general population. What I didn't really expect is, you realize you improve the quality of their life. So, they may not have been able to pick up their kids because their back was hurting 2 months ago. All of a sudden, their kids, run up to them and they can pick them up. And that's made a massive difference to that person's quality of life. It's not always about improving a number in the gym. So those are great too. Don't get me wrong, but it's appreciating that these small wins that people have.
Yeah, but if you were to go back in time, if time travel was an option, what piece of advice or what couple pieces of advice would you give yourself in what you've learned in particular over probably the last 12 to 18, maybe 24 months with the training and ATG? What piece of advice would you give yourself?
I think focus on the long game. Focus on think about a year. Think about where I can be in 2 years' time versus think about where I can be in this 4-week block. Can I increase my vertical by 3 inches, 10 centimeters, whatever you want to put it. And I think that was always the mindset. You gravitate towards the high-end marketing, like, increase your jump in 12 weeks. Yeah, I did. But then all of a sudden, my knees were hurting, my Achilles was hurting because all I did was jumping. And just thinking about that, from a long-term approach, because ultimately that will lead you to a better place anyway, because you'll be able to continuously improve your skill set or your athleticism. So just having that, and I think, at that age, there is time. Even now, we still have lots of time, but we always felt like, time's going to run out. And I think that was my mindset back then. I just always thought, hey, time's against me. If I'm going to make professional, I've got to do it now. Whereas, you see cases all the time, you actually have plenty of opportunity. I think if you do the right thing and stay on the field, that's the key. I think if you stay on the field, play as many games as you can, ultimately those skills come along. And if you can improve athleticism as part of that, you'll be way up.
It's like a conversation we had last week, wasn't it, Matt, with Zach about the trainings and, all the young ones like Maddie, Neven, they can just train and train and train. And
yeah.
Isn't that right, Maddie?
I did. Trust me, I did all of the put 3 inches, 12 inches, whatever on your vertical in 4 weeks, and I never made it past the first week. Was the problem? I'd always come down with some ankle or a knee or a back or something. So I think that's one of the most important things, and you mentioned it a little bit. Do you see the gym and strength training and what you do primarily as a means to get athletes to stay on the field, and then secondarily the athleticism gains will come, or do you kind of see that going hand in hand, or how does that kind of fit in your thought process?
I think it's a bit of both, because ultimately I still got to give them. They need to see improvement. They need to see the ability that, hey, I'm improving in here, because it depends on the individual. You get some guys, they don't care. They don't care on the way they look. They just want to be able to play their sport. And then there's other guys that are coming in here and they like the way they look. They like to be able to lift more numbers. So they gravitate and they're more, I'll say, have a really big passion for the gym. And they want to see those numbers improve. But at the same time, if they're playing a sport and they're serious about it, I want them to be able to play as many games as they can. Because, me being a good strength coach is not going to help their soccer ability. At the end of the day, they still need to be able to pass, still need to be able to shoot, need to be able to dribble. So they need to work on their own skills. But if I can get them out on that pitch playing week in, week out, training week in, week out, I know they'll be a better soccer player. But all of a sudden, if I can add that engine on there as well, so now he's faster, that's ultimately going to be the best of both worlds. And then they'll buy into the system. And then, so my goal is not to have someone here for 4 to 6 weeks. It's actually to keep them here for multiple years. And then for them to reach their ceiling and their potential where they could be as a great athlete, which will then hopefully translate to them being a great player for whatever sport it is that they do. So I think it's both. And whenever I speak to coaches, I discuss it to them as in, hey, my goal is to get your players playing as many games as I can, because I know you've got the best chance to win your league, or get your best team out there to have a really successful year. So a part of that is, yes, keeping them on there, but then underlying, I still want them to perform, and I want them to look like an athlete too, So I'm big on trying to push them in terms of their nutrition and trying to take care of those things as well, because I know the confidence it'll bring them. And you see it straight away. You see other guys when they first walk in, they're a bit shy, timid walking in. 2-3 months later, when they're lifting, they're coming in with the short sleeves and they're, and they feel good about themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. When you get on that field, you want to feel confident, especially depending, some of the more physical sports that they play.
I was just going to add in, when I was playing, I absolutely felt the most confident when I could string the most games together in a row. When I was in and out, confidence was a real problem for me. But when I could get, and this was rare, but when I could get 10, 12, 15 games in a row, it was like I was always playing my best at the end of that run of games that I would play in any of the games. So I think that is super important to be able to keep people on the field.
Neven,
100. Yeah.
Jump in.
Sorry, Steph. And I love what you said there, Matt, because I totally agree with that. So one of the biggest things is whenever I've come back from an injury, I've always had at the back of my mind, can I get into this movement? Am I going to hurt myself? And that throws off your timing. You know, when I've had my best games, you've always been in the flow. You haven't really been thinking about your movement because you're worried about the next sequence of play. And it just felt natural. Whereas whenever you come back from injury, there's always that little bit of a behind, the back of your mind. It's like, okay, am I going to be okay here? And you do that and you're basically already behind. Whereas, like you said, if you can not have those thoughts in your mind, because you're just out there, you're just in the moment playing your sport, it makes a massive difference to your performance.
Awesome. Neven, I was going to take a little detour, look at things from like a business perspective for the next couple of minutes. How have you managed to include football teams, soccer teams, basketball players, all that sort of stuff within your training? I know that we've had this chat before about reaching out to clubs and to coaches, but that next step is one thing that I've found, in particular in Adelaide. It might just be in Adelaide. I mean, only I know that, and we know that. But how have you managed to get players to make that next step or make that commitment towards actually getting into the training? Obviously, there's certain things that you do, but what have been the specific things that you focused on in getting those players? Because you know the benefits of what ATG does, and there's obvious other people that do too, because they're training with you and myself and with Matt as well. But how have you found that? Have you found that difficult? And if so, how have you overcome that as a challenge?
Yeah. And moving to Adelaide was great because it allowed me the opportunity to do this, but it was also challenging because I didn't have the established networks yet. I hadn't played at some of these clubs that I had back in Melbourne. Walking into a club there is a lot easier because you know the people, you know the presidents, and you have established a relationship with them. Whereas here, I'm walking in cold, speaking to a president of a club or a senior coach who knows nothing about me. And it takes time, it takes time to establish these things. So a lot of the challenges I had was, how do I get some of these, young athletes in? So initially, and I tried everything. I've tried, whether it's, I'll say a bit of marketing online, and I've had some success with that, getting occasionally one or two athletes there. But for me, what I realized is it really is the long game, right? It's get one athlete, do a really good job because he'll refer you on. He'll invite his friends, or he'll mention it to somebody else, and then all of a sudden you've got a referral source there as well. So I focused on that path, but I also went down the direct route to the coaches and the clubs because I felt that that's a great way. If you can tap into a club and build a good relationship with them, you could obviously get multiple players in. But I also know that's a long game too, because at the end of the day, when these clubs are giving you players, they're entrusting you with their athletes, and you've got to do the right thing. So it's a matter of getting these guys, one or two, whatever it may be, and then starting to build on that. So when I was having chats with some of the presidents and the coaches, they would be like, well, who can we send you? So, I'm like, give me whoever you want. If you've got somebody that's got an injury, well, we'll start with them, right? Because then we can establish that trust. Okay, I can at least get these guys back on the field. Or it could be someone that, hey, wants to do a little bit extra. Because there's a lot of guys out there that are going after the local, big box gym, and they're just doing what we did in a way. They're reading their T Nation articles and they're training like a bodybuilder or a powerlifter. But reality is that's not ultimately going to lead them. They'll have some success initially and they may look better in a t-shirt, but they're probably not going to move that much better. So it's about getting some of these guys in. And the biggest challenge is, selling someone on your value because they need to experience it first. So my biggest goal was, how do I get them into the gym? So whatever it takes to get them into the gym, just so I can sell them on that, to show them that experience, and then they can see the value. Because you explaining something to someone is not really going to mean much to them until they experience it. So, that was the biggest thing for me is how can I get some of these guys here? So I've always tried to gravitate towards, if I can get a coach out here to bring one of his players so I can illustrate to them what I do, that always worked really well because they could, one, see that, you know what you're talking about to an extent, right? But you can make changes there on the spot. Whether it's just a little bit of mobility work or whether it's explaining to them the reason we go to full depth, you can get that value, and then all of a sudden this coach will be able to, in his head, he'll be able to pinpoint who needs it. He'll be able to say, okay, this person could benefit from this, or I could use this next season. So I think getting that buy-in from coaches or, committee members, if you want to put it that way, or presidents, is always a big one. So I always try to take that little bit next step further, I guess, just in the initial phases now while I'm still growing my business, still kind of growing my name. Later on, obviously, I think that'll kind of, in a way, take care of itself, that reputation. But initially, you've got to actually do, you've got to roll the sleeves up. And there was a lot of no's, there's a lot of no's where you get, oh, we're okay, we've got somebody else, or we're not looking at anything this year. And that's okay. Maybe the time's just not right now. But I always, try to leave a good impression, but always have the ability to follow up, whether it's 6 or 12 months' time.
Hormozy talks about it a lot. I know that we've spoken about him a lot, Maddie. I've listened to his book. I'm on the third round through on Audible at the moment, Alex Hormozy's $100 million offer. And he talks about, the value, what are you giving for your offer? What are you offering to them, and how valuable is it to them? Because one thing that I realize a lot of people don't know, especially in Australia, is ATG is not as massive as what it is in the US at the moment. And so I think that myself and yourself, Neven, we're on that the start of it, basically. And it's like that point of difference, that massive point of difference where you're not a commodity. Like, you're not a personal trainer. You're not your regular gym. You're someone completely different. And it is something completely different too. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned was in Australia, in Adelaide and Melbourne, is the gym culture isn't kind of the same thing as it is in the US, and that kind of reflects in the size of ATG and the number of people working with it. The old expression is that everything works until it doesn't, and some things don't work for very long and others work forever. How have you kind of seen, or I guess, have you seen much of a change in the growth of, let's keep it to athletes, soccer players wanting to get into the gym, and then let's keep it just to soccer players, because we know rugby is a little bit different with the physical requirements. How have you seen that change, or what kind of thoughts do you have on that sort of gym culture?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, but we're still, athletes still, at the end of the day, they think they're going to play their sport, and then a lot of times that'll be enough. And then they'll just be able to, improve their speed and athleticism just by playing their sport, which we know they'll increase to an extent. But reality is, unless we build that engine, unless we build those muscles and those tissues to have the ability to provide that force output, they're not going to have that. So I think it's slowly coming around, but soccer specifically, in my opinion, I think there's kids out there that are off doing a little bit of their own. They're the ones that'll gravitate towards what we do, especially when we bring them in here. We realize, and then we show them, okay, well, leg press is probably not the only way we can actually build your lower body. There's better movements for that. And I think sometimes, depending on the athlete, some athletes will really buy in and they'll want to know what movement is, going to benefit them. And then other guys will be like, oh, I don't really care. Just you do your thing. You tell me what to do, and I'll come in there and do it, sort of thing. I do find that, we are getting a little bit more professional from an athletic training standpoint. I think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream now. You see some of these bigger gyms popping up that are focused on athletic performance, right? Which is fantastic, because we need more of them, One of my goals, and I think even from Steph as well, is to kind of elevate the performance and the athleticism of some of these younger players in these leagues, because we're starting to see, unfortunately, guys are on their computers all the time. Fast food is such an ease for us. So everyone's a little bit slower, a little bit fatter, I'll say. So people don't have this natural instinct to go and have a kick of a ball and stay in good shape. So we really kind of got to bridge that gap in any way we can and get people to be more active and doing more.
I can definitely see that as well. Speaking from being in a similar position in terms of where we're living at the moment. I just launched a 6-week soccer body program reached out to, I actually had Terry, who's moved over to Cumberland, who you've had a chat with, Neven. And he let me know that a lot of the reserve players, after their end of season meeting that they had, were like, we want more strength and conditioning and need more strength and conditioning. What can we do? And so Terry reached out to me. I reached out to the players, both in the 18s and the reserves. And as of now, in the last week, we've got 6 signups for October, which is awesome, because you can start to see that there's like that gravitational pull towards wanting to do more of that. I'll say athletic training, or that getting that actual proper soccer body training, which is really, really cool. But it's almost like the kids need a push, because that intensity and being out to the trainings, the intensity, not just from the coach, because the coaches tend to push that intensity, but from the players in that 18s and reserves bracket, it's it's not the same as what it was when, I'm sure, like when we played, Neven, and probably similar to yourself as well, Matt, but playing in that group, it's like the kids don't have that same enthusiasm or intensity to want to push training, to get the results out of training. It's only until you reach that senior level where, you know, you've got reserves and 18s, then jump to the senior level. It's a massive jump. And unless you're exceptional in 18s and reserves, that jump is going to be even bigger if you're not putting in that effort within training. So it's kind of a question, but more of a comment. How do you see that changing, Neven? Do you see it as like people like us helping out from the outside perspective for players to go and see, or do you see it as going to the clubs and being like, okay, listen, this is what needs to be done. This is how you can get more bang for your buck in training. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a bit of both, you know, and a lot of the times at the moment with me, I always, you know, when I'm speaking with coaches, I always say, well, my service is supplementary to what you guys do, right? I'm not going to help you guys from your skill set point of view, but I'll give you a better athlete. So I always encourage them to send athletes to me. So it's completely different. They know when they're coming in here, we're focusing on strength. We're focusing on their movement quality. We're not focusing on drills, if you want to put it that way. So I like that approach, but I think that might not always be the best way, because you might not be able to get somebody in, you know, for an extra, you know, a couple of hours in the gym. So if, at the very least, it'd be great to incorporate some of this on the field. The challenge a lot of time coaches have is, you know, they're not in a professional environment. They don't have these plays 5-6 times a week. They might have that 2 or 3 times a week, and they've got to be able to split up that workload between, you know, their skills and fundamentally playing their sport, and then, you know, the strength and conditioning side, you know, from that. And depending on the coach, they don't always want that, because if they've got a more of I'll say an older school mentality, they just want to focus on ball drills and tactics, then, you know, that's going to be a harder sell. So I always think kids that want to take it a bit more seriously, they should be doing it outside, right? We can all make priorities, especially at that age. I think we've got plenty of opportunity to do that. We just got to make that time commitment, and then they'll see it benefiting themselves in their sport. So I think the long-term plays get them, you know, doing it specifically in the gym. They know it's completely different, you know, and work out your recovery and what you need to do, whether it's, you know, start of the week. But in the short term, if that's what we've got to do to open up their mind to what the benefit is for them, then by all means, yes, let's get it in as part of their workouts, if the coaches are willing to open to that.
So one of the things I struggled with was sort of overtraining and overexerting myself, because I recognized the importance of the gym pretty early. I didn't know how to take advantage of it, but I recognized it. So I would train hard, 5-6 times a week. If it was the off season, 10 times a week, and then try to add the gym in with that. So how do you sort of guide your athletes into not doing too much, but at times getting the minimal effective dose, and other times it's time to really go with it? So how do you help them through that?
Yeah. I think the challenge here is, and I love what Ben Clarifield says, you know, everything moves at the speed of trust. And I think that's so true, you know. So the first day an athlete walks into here, I'm not going to try to plan out his, you know, everything that he does outside of here. You know, my goal is to show him value in terms of what I can do with him. And, you know, if he's overtraining at that point, I think I've just got to kind of bite my lip a little bit and then just kind of get a bit of a sense for that. And then as we start to see improvement, we start to delve down that hole and then guide him in the right direction. And I 100% agree with you, because a lot of guys are either training incorrectly or they're overtraining. They're doing too much. Sometimes they just need to relax a little bit, you know. We're coming to the end of off season here, and I've got a lot of athletes, and they've just finished their season, but they want to be off and doing their running and their jogging, where their seasons won't start for another 12 to 14 weeks, you know. And my recommendation is just relax, let things settle, focus, you know, getting them strong, because at the end of the day, and the example I always use is, you know, you've got two ends of the pendulum. You've got explosiveness, strength, to speed on one side, but then you've got, you know, long distance, slow tempo runs, if you want to put it, on the other end. You know, your body's not always going to know what you want it to adapt to, right? So it's going to be kind of, where do you want me to go? Whereas if we can just, you know, let those joints settle a little bit, focus on slowing things down here in the gym, getting strong, ironing out all those overused things that we had throughout the season. And then, you know, as the season's getting a little bit closer, okay, you want to start a little bit of preparation in terms of that, no problems. We'll do some extra running, but kind of work out their weekly workload. And I think that's where the benefit we have as a coach is we've been there, we've made all those mistakes, and we know, you know, kind of the right amount. Now, each individual is different in terms of how much they can tolerate, but I think we've got to adjust to that. rather than just bombarding them with it. So, we do things, for a couple of weeks. If things are going well, okay, add in another session. So I think having someone in their corner who can actually guide them on the best approach and their total volume is really important.
We were joking last week with Zach Woodward that sometimes the best session for an athlete is just Steph knows, just to bring him in and have him take a nap. We were joking this sometimes that's the most beneficial thing, but like you would get laughed out of any sort of reasonable strength and conditioning room like that.
Yeah, 100%. But sometimes it's the other way. Sometimes it's, you need to get in here more. You need to come in a little bit more, focus on this, especially in the off season. This is now important. You're not doing anything else. Just focus on, a couple of key things and get really good at them, and then, then kind of balance it out a little bit later on. So I think, and that's the benefit of a coach is generally we've got, a lot more of the experience, and we know what it is that they need at that time.
It's so interesting because I've had a couple of chats with the under 18s and a few reserves players over the weekend, and they've had a week off, but man, they look exhausted. Like they look physically fatigued, like they're being drummed with so much. And I agree. It's like, just take some time. You've got a couple of weeks now where you can just, flesh out and see how you're feeling, how your body's gone over the year, and then you can get back into it, and we can slowly work our way back into it again, building on the strength and whatnot. So it's such an interesting topic because you don't want to take it too far, but then you don't want to take it like not far enough. And I think that's not that kids of today, Matt, you're just out of that generation, but it feels like to me that
thank you.
Like the kids of today, not that they're afraid of hard work, but they might not know the difference between hard work and smart work. Like, what is the right thing to be doing? And it's the guidance that we spoke about, and you spoke about there, Neven, and Matt as well. It's like having someone that's able to guide you through the path, because we have experienced that. We've all experienced it before. So we are able to help you on that path towards what you really want to do and where you really want to go with it. So it's just a comment in there.
Yeah, and 100%. I love what you said in terms of that, because, it might come off like we're picking on the younger generation now, and we're not, because to an extent they've grown up this way. Everything's so easily accessible to them. Well, if something doesn't work, we just move on to the next thing. Whereas, I guess we're thinking back, 10, 15, 20 years ago, everything wasn't as easily accessible. So sometimes we just got to give them an opportunity, because some of these young kids, they want it. They want to put in the work and they want to work hard, but they just need to be, in a way shown what they need to actually do and the best approach to doing that. So it's not, I think it's not always kind of labeling them as all in the same boat, because like I said, a lot of them just haven't had the opportunity to have that understanding of what it takes to go to the next level. They just think everything comes easily because I can pick up my phone and I can order it, it'll be here within a minute. That wasn't always the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things so when Steph was talking about working smart versus working hard, and one of the things I always thought was like, well, all right, well, I'll figure out the smart way and then I'll just do it a ton. It's like, well, that's not really how it works. Part of working smart a lot of times is working really hard on a couple specific things, because nobody has the workload, the work capacity to work really hard on getting in shape, getting faster, improving your technical ability, and getting good at being in the game. And it's that kind of knowledge of being able to understand, this is what we're going to spend this 8 weeks on, really going hard on this. And we're going to work on a little bit of the other stuff, but we're going to use the other things as supplementary and lower the volume or the workload or whatever, to the point that it doesn't detract from what our goal is here. And that's something that, for me, even if I would have known all of the ATG principles and the spring ankle stuff and whatever, the west side, whatever, and I sort of had an idea about them, I wouldn't have worked for me because I would have done too much of it. I would have been like, all right, cool, I'm going to squat ass to grass every day, heavy, and then I'm also going to do box squats. I'm going to do all. It's like, all right, calm down, 17-year-old Matthew. That's almost more important in a lot of ways and you kind of alluded to some people. The most important message is actually do less. And then you always have the people that it's like, all right, you got to kick them in the ass, like do some more. But for a lot of the people that I would imagine are kind of who would listen to us talking here and get in the HG circle, doing less is a lot of the battle sometimes, and really dialing in on what's important.
Neven, I know you've got a class to get to, so we won't keep you any longer. Where can the S&C podcast listeners find you on the socials?
I probably don't do enough in the socials as much probably as I should, but just DA training. I'm there on my website, DA training. I'm on Instagram a little bit. Haven't been on for a little while, but I'll probably, as we're getting out of winter now, I'll start to ramp things up a little bit and get out of my hibernation zone and focus on a little bit more content out there. Because it's been okay. You know, you still get people coming up to you on Instagram and they're like, oh, you know, I saw your stuff, I'd like to come in. So it is a great way to obviously attract clients. It's just not a passion for me. I love training people inside the gym, so anytime I can kind of get more people in there, I prefer that. But at the end of the day, it's about getting that message out there and helping as many people as we can. So.
Where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm at Sport Performance, SKAAR Performance on all of the fun sites, Instagram, YouTube, to probably to Steph's dismay and Brian's dismay. I'm still on TikTok. So that's where you can find me. What about you, Steph?
Coach Carly with the 3 eyes. The TikTok is gone. I was looking at it the other day and I'm like, I'm just deleting that and got rid of it. So just on Instagram, putting all my attention there for now. Who knows? Maybe something might change. But Neven, thank you so much for joining us this morning for us, this afternoon for Matt. Really looking forward to the next time that we speak and the next time that we catch up in person. Who knows? Maybe Matt, one time when you come down to Adelaide, all 3 of us can get together and have a chat.
Straight in the gym, work out and a chat.
Awesome.
Would be awesome.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's always great to catch up with like-minded people and a great way to start the week as well. So appreciate it.
Yeah, love it. Thanks for coming on. And that's it for this week. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you all next week.